So hi, everyone. This is Cameron Perez-Verdia calling. I am the new co-chair of this committee with Crystal Kennedy. We are going to alternate chairing the meeting. So I will be taking on this first one. So I'd like to call this meeting of the Anchorage Assembly Public Safety Committee meeting to order. We will start by going around and doing roll call. Mandy, do you want to go around and do that?
I can do that. Let's see. Oh, sorry, we don't usually do roll call for this one, so I don't have the whole list.
So
let me pull it up real quick. Okay, Christopher Constant.
Yeah.
Crystal Kennedy.
Here.
Jamie Allard.
Here.
Cameron Perez-Verdia.
here.
Austin Quinn Davidson.
Here.
Meg Zalatal. Oh, she's just getting in. Meg Zalatal. Felix Rivera.
Present.
Forrest Dunbar.
Here.
Pete Peterson.
Hello.
Mr. Weddleton, John Weddleton.
Here.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Here.
Okay, and I did see that Meg Zalatel is on.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for being here today. Hopefully you had a chance to look at the agenda. We are going to start with a presentation from Chief Tim Benningfield. And Chief, if you could try to keep your presentation to about 10 minutes, that would be great to make sure that we get through all of the items on our agenda. And then once we finish that, we'll have a brief conversation about the role of this committee as it relates to alcohol licenses. I don't believe that there are any licenses that we'll be reviewing today, but we want to make sure that we have some time to just make sure that it's clear what the role of the committee is going to be going forward. Then our third item is going to be an opportunity for some brief presentations from the Anchorage Police Department, the Anchorage Fire Department, and the Department of Law. I was saying Department of Justice, but I should be saying Department of Law. Is that correct? Okay. Yeah. Okay. And so the intention there really is to begin to get a sense from those departments what they would suggest the priorities of this committee are over the next 12 months. And so each of them were sent a series of questions to sort of help shape that. So let's get started with the presentation. Chief Benningfield, do you have a PowerPoint that you're going to use for your presentation?
I do. I will share my screen. I'll take over presentation here shortly. I assume everyone can hear me. I'm unmuted, and if I could get someone to, perfect. I see some heads shaking. So
yeah. And Chief, just one second. Let me interrupt you for a second. And if the members could, if you have questions or if you could just use the chat function and type the fact that you want to be in the queue in the chat function, then I'll make sure to get you in the queue. Sorry, Chief, go ahead.
No worries. Just thanks to you and Assemblymember Kennedy for the invite. The invite was put out for the April meeting, and of course it got canceled. So Assemblymember Kennedy simply asked that I share a few moments and talk about the annual report that Chugiak puts out each year. So I sent that report out to everyone a little bit earlier prior to the meeting, and I just thought I'd go through it real quickly and then allow anyone to clarify any questions that you might have. So I would like just have a little bit of feedback about the presentation. Can everyone see the PowerPoint that I'm sharing?
Yep.
Perfect. So every year, about March, we compile our statistics and just put together an annual report to share with our community as well as our elected officials. So one of the things that I wanted to point out in the letter that I started off this report with was just the diversity and the nature of calls. Chugiak, for the first time in its history, went over 1,000 calls, and about 70% of those calls were for emergency medical services. And a number of those calls, somewhere around 20% of those calls were very diverse, and it just makes me proud to know that there are over 100 volunteers that do what they do for out of the goodness of their heart, and they often talk about pride as their pay and their neighbors helping neighbors, and that's exactly what they do. The volunteer responders here at Chugiak do not get any stipends, any paid on call, any reimbursements for the time that they put forth. So I thought it'd be a good idea just to remind everyone in the Public Safety Committee how Chugiak Volunteer Fire Department is created. CVFRD is a nonprofit that is a contractor with the municipality to provide fire and emergency services out here in the Chugiak Fire Service area. And there is a board of supervisors elected by the community out here in the Chugiak Fire Service area. There is also a board of directors that represents the 501c3 that is Chugiak Volunteer Fire Department, and they oversee the operations of me, the chief, who runs the department's day-to-day operations. We have 4 full-time staff, which include myself, a training coordinator, administrative specialist, and a maintenance specialist. And other than that, the 107 members that make up Chugiak Fire Department as responders are all volunteers. So I'd point out in that organizational chart that you're seeing on the right that everything from assistant chief through firefighter, EMT, paramedic, all of those are volunteer responder positions. Chugiak Fire Service residents, as you should know, if you don't, we'll just remind you, pay a 1 millage on property taxes, which basically funds us about $1.3 million annually from the fire service area. That budget, I've shared that budget over the last 3 years. You can see since 2017, our budget has declined. There's various reasons for that. I'd love to answer any questions or share information about that later on. Our expenditures have been pretty consistent along those 3 years, and you'll see over there in the last column the savings that we end up putting back into a fund balance that allows us to fund our capital projects, and most of our capital projects are apparatus. We have an aging fleet, and we continue to try to catch that up. In addition to the property taxes for fire, Chugiak is part of the Anchorage area-wide EMS system, and from the Anchorage area-wide EMS budget, we end up getting about $175,000, and we do a pretty good job of spending that. So as you can see, our operating budget is just a little bit over $1 million, and I think that becomes important here in a few moments when we talk about these 107 members that are volunteering their time. Last year, in 2019, they volunteered 61,500 hours and responded to those 1,000 calls. I've put that into perspective on the right side of that slide just to indicate to you that here in Alaska, Alaska volunteer hours, an average across the board for all volunteer activities that happen in the state of Alaska is quantified at $27.88 an hour. And if you can do the math, I did it real quick for you. Basically, that 61,500 volunteer hours equates to about a $1.7 million savings to the taxpayers out here. So our budget of a little over $1 million is less than what the savings is that these volunteers provide. Some of the things that we've worked on this past year, we've we've identified that our responders are here for several reasons, but one of the main reasons they're here is to get quality training. So we put a little time and effort into our facilities out here. We dipped into the fund balance and developed a enhanced training center that we have. Added a training tower as well as a mock-up of a building, business, house, whatever we want to do to give realistic training simulations to our folks. Here in a few moments, you'll notice that we've got 5 fire stations spread throughout the Chugach Fire Service area, and one of those stations over on South Birchwood Loop had a little facelift this year. We were pretty proud of that. And then down at the bottom of that screen, we've basically separated out how much training our folks have done. Pretty proud of the fact that over 8,500 hours were achieved here inside the station, not to mention people going outside the area to get quality training. We added several certified firefighters, a number of emergency medical technicians as well. Just something that we focused on this past year was on our training. Our mantra for 2019 was train and grow, and we focused real heavily on giving our members an opportunity to get quality training. You probably read through that we offer an awards program every year. We're pretty proud of the fact that we're able to take our responders off campus and give them the recognition through a night of awards and pomp and circumstance. And we did that in February, and that's typically why I'm waiting till March to put out this annual report, because those awards are given in the end of February, and we don't want to let the cat out of the bag until that's done. Again, you can just look through some of the successes that we had. We offered several awards, including our Lifesaver Medal awarded to a individual who's actually got family on the department. You can read through that at your leisure. And then we also took part in the wildland season, the wildfire season last year, and offered our campaign medal to a number of individuals that were deployed to the McKinley fire in the Mat-Su Borough. We got a very vibrant junior firefighters program. We welcome junior firefighters between the ages of 14 and 18, and currently we have a dozen firefighters that are training. And the great thing about them is that they are involved in the community, and typically they stay around and continue to volunteer for us as they get older. We have a great community support network. We reach out to the community. We did almost 1,000 fire prevention individual contacts last year with the schools. We handed out over 600 bags of fire prevention materials at Boo at the Beach and our Winter Wonderland in Eagle River. And we recognized a number of businesses in our community. We do that every year just to tell them thanks, not only for providing us support in just visits and a cup of coffee every once in a while, but also in those businesses that support our responders, allowing them off work for training, allowing them off of work to come and be involved in responses. We're pretty active in Juneau during our February visit. We were able to visit with most of our representatives. We missed the governor this year, but typically we're able to get down there once a year, as well as network here in the community when they, as well as you all, Crystal, and we welcome Jamie aboard and be visiting with them at every opportunity. I mentioned earlier, we've got 5 fire stations spread out. I'm sitting in Fire Station 35 right now, which is at Fire Lake, just north of Eagle River. Fire Station 31 is just about 2 miles down the road on the Oak Glen Highway. Station 33 is out at Peters Creek. Station 34 is over at the Birchwood Airport. Station 32 is in the Birchwood neighborhood over on the Inlet View. We typically focus our response efforts from these 3 stations along the Oak Glen Highway. Those give us access to quick access to all of our areas. Station 31 is where our responders are right now that are on duty. Again, I remind you that we are a 100% volunteer organization, but we staff that station right there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with responders. I'd love to explain that to you one of these days. There's a lot of reasons we're able to do that, but we are able to staff 24/7 with 100% volunteer responders, which is really unheard of in today's volunteer organizations. Station 33 out here at Peters Creek, that's going to be the next on our priority list as far as capital, as far as facilities. So down the road, several of you will probably hear us coming to you saying, hey, we need some help. And I'm just going to wrap that up by saying that this is our focus for 2020. We're focusing on building our strength, and you can see what that is, and you can see our leadership, our members that are in leadership positions for 2020. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I understand that I might expect a few questions. If not, I'll turn it back over.
Great. Yeah, I have a few questions for you. Mr. Constant, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, hey, Chief Christopher Constant here. I had an email back and forth with you and Ms. Kennedy about the idea of applying for this very small grant. I'm hoping you've had a chance to dig a little bit because I'd love to get that going.
Yeah, I had a brief opportunity to take a look at it, and I think I was thinking that I sent you back a response. If not, I'll dig back into it, and would love to talk to you more about that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Also in the queue, I have Miss Kennedy. Would you like to ask a question?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chief, for doing this and helping everybody get a better picture of this organization. I know you're really proud of it, and I know you really like to talk about all the great things that they do. But one of the things that I think that you guys do that we probably could use some more information in is how do you actually collaborate with the Anchorage Fire Department? What kind of things do you guys do together? How do you support each other? Can you talk a little bit about that? Thanks.
So our communities are pretty significantly different, but in reality, we understand each other's unique diversity. So just to kind of give you all some background, Chief Hetrick and I have been in each other's orbit for almost a decade now before either one of us were in these positions. Chief Hetrick was in training while I was at the university, and she went to the fire department, and I was at the fire department, and so on and so forth. So the way that I see things going right now is the best relationship that I have ever heard of in the history of these two departments. Chugiak is a contractor of the municipality, and by virtue of that contract, the Anchorage Fire Chief is the administrator of that contract. And Chief Hetrick and I talk weekly, if not more often than that. So some of the things that we do is we communicate with each other as far as training opportunities. We communicate with each other as far as needs of our community. Being right here butted up next to Eagle River affords us some opportunities to help each other out. Neither one of us are hesitant to say, hey, we're busy, can you come over and help us out? So we rely on each other pretty regularly to provide the services out here on the north end of the municipality.
Great, thank you, Chief. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you.
Wonderful. Well, Chief, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate that the presentation. Doesn't look like I have any more questions, but really appreciate you coming out and sharing the information with us.
All right, perfect. Thanks, everyone. I hope everyone has a great day.
And you're certainly welcome to stay on and participate in the rest of the meeting, Chief.
I appreciate that, and I will. I'm just going to darken out and mute.
Miss Kennedy, Ms. Kennedy, do you have a question? Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to make a comment that if ever anybody wanted the tour of the Chugiak Volunteer Fire Department and all of their facilities in the area that they cover, I know Chief would be more than happy to show you around. So thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to the next item. I did want to say that Ms. Kennedy and I had a conversation prior to this meeting, and are very interested in thinking about how this committee can really use its time wisely, can add value to the different departments and administration, and certainly to the public. And so we wanted to dedicate a fair chunk of time at this meeting to really setting the right course for the work that we're going to be doing over the next year, and thinking about what we should be focusing on and what we should be spending our time on. And so this next part of our agenda, I have not participated a great deal in the Public Safety Committee in the past, and so I'm interested in creating a little bit of space to have a discussion with the members about the role of this committee as it relates to discussing and making recommendations on licensing. And so it's my understanding that there's not an issue coming forward for this meeting, but I wanted to create a little bit of space and possibly past chairs to share any thoughts that you have about what the role has been. And then I'm really interested in hearing from the members of this committee or others about what the role should be in this committee in terms of looking at and in discussing and making recommendations to the Assembly related to licensing. So I'm just going to open it up for discussion at this time, and I would even prompt past chairs to add to that. And I have Todd Sherwood here. So would you like to start, Todd, and talk about sort of what the role has been in the past for this committee?
This is Todd Sherwood, Assistant Municipal Attorney. And actually, I just added that just so people would know I was here. Like Dean Gates, we've dealt with alcohol licensing on and off over the years, but in truth, I do not know what the role of the committee has been in the past, because usually I've gotten involved only in the problem ones, and that's if they've gone to the committee, it's after the committee part. So I'm just kind of here to listen, or if there's questions that I can answer about process, I'd be happy to try and do that.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I'm very interested as well in understanding that, because I certainly don't want our work over the next 12 months to take a turn that doesn't honor the work of the past. So so I would just sort of open it up here and see if there are members who would like to help to inform us of what has been the past work of this committee as it relates to reviewing and discussing and making recommendations around licensing. Felix.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I think Ms. Kennedy was ahead of me on the list.
First. Oh, she is. You're right. I didn't see that. Ms. Kennedy, yes.
Well, actually, I have a question, but if you want to go ahead and just hear from past chairs, I think that's valuable, and I can save my question till a few minutes later. So go ahead and go, Felix. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Kennedy. So I am not a past chair of this committee, but I have had experience particularly dealing with mom and pops through this committee, and it was just during however many work sessions and meetings that we had dealing with mom and pops, there was only one committee meeting during which we brought in mom and pops to just have a discussion. The other parts, sort of the formal parts of reviewing whatever protest, those were had, that was before the body, those were had either at the regular assembly meetings or in work sessions. But before all of that, process began, it did start. I don't know if I'd use the term start, but at least the Public Safety Committee did instigate the conversation, which eventually led to further action. So that's in my experience, the only role the Public Safety Committee has had in regards to alcohol licenses.
Great. Do any other past chairs want to share their thoughts on what the role has been or the role should be moving forward related to alcohol licensing? Let's see, I've got Mr. Dunbar in the queue. Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, I'll just say real quickly, I don't recall, even going back 3 or 4 years, I don't recall the Public Safety Committee ever having a systematic role the way that the CED committee has on marijuana licenses, for example, where it reviews a high volume of them. I just recall, as Mr. Rivera alluded to, sort of here and there, as Mr. Falls would say, onesie twosies of problem licenses ending up for discussion at the committee. But again, nothing systematic.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Constant. Mr. Constant, I think you're on mute. Okay, I'm going to come back to you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Weddleton?
Mr. Chair, this is Mr. Constant. I think I've unmuted.
Oh, okay, good. You're back. Yes.
Yeah, my
Go for it.
computer's being a jerk. So this alcohol question is an interesting one. I made this case a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years now, that, and this might be objectionable to the CEDC committee, that the procedures that are followed there and the methods that have evolved over time in relationship to reviewing and analyzing marijuana permits actually is well supported to be the place that also addresses the ongoing business of alcohol and licensing and permits, because these processes are very parallel. And the state some years ago now, maybe 5 years ago, moved their alcohol licensing from the Department of Public Safety to the Department of Commerce and Community and Economic Development, and AMCO now rests, AMCO, which is alcohol and marijuana, in the community and economic development sphere, not the public safety sphere. And so there's, I believe, a strong argument for us to contemplate removing the questions of regular business of alcohol licensing from this committee to the CEDC, and allowing this committee to focus on issues of crime, issues of sex trafficking, issues of really bad things that are going on in our community that could otherwise get bogged down if this committee starts to run through the same processes that another committee is really good at. And so I would argue that at some point we ought to look really closely at moving the alcohol matters other than extreme public safety issues that might arise from bad bars from this committee to that committee. Just a thought.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Constant. Next in the queue, I have Mr. Weddleton.
Good timing. I might have a bit different view on that, as Chris might expect. We are looking at forming a commission that will look at marijuana licenses to take that role away from the Community and Economic Development Committee. As far as liquor licenses, we haven't really done a whole lot on the Community and Economic Development Committee, except in relation to kind of mom and pops and in and out liquor, and Midtown Community Council's request that the city do area-wide restrictions on liquor stores, so that instead of one store having restrictions like we did with mom and pops, and then a store literally a stone's throw away not having those restrictions. And we haven't really gotten far with that for a number of reasons, but it does seem like that's more of a public safety thing than a land use, and would land more in this committee. So that's my thought on that.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Also in the queue, I have Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Make sure you can all hear me. Well, I wanted to mention that the last time I recall, the Public Safety Committee treating a liquor licensee with public safety issues was Mom and Pops, and I think it was last September 2019. The owner had appeared to the Public Safety Committee. I think it was, it might have been at the request of the then Chair Rivera. I'm not sure. My memory's good, not that great. Anyway, I wanted to mention that the code outlines the process for bringing the liquor licensees before the Public Safety Committee. It's very narrow. And in the chat, Mandy Honest, our licensing clerk, posted a document with the code sections. In section 230, 120, subsection D and E there, it mentions the Public Safety Committee, and it's in response to if the police chief determines there's operation that demonstrates a risk to public order, or that's in D, the chief can prepare, submit a memo to the committee for review, and so forth. The committee can recommend corrective measures or introduce a formal resolution stating grounds for protest. And then subsection E there, 230.120E, also says that the chief may submit to the entire assembly or the Public Safety Committee the compilation of police incident reports. I think that Mandy, you can clarify for me if I not stating this accurately, but I think that's the bar safety reports that we're receiving and usually attaching to the liquor license renewal resolution for protest or the way protest. So you should see those in those attachments under subsection E. And I just wanted to point out those two specific pieces in code with Public Safety Committee and its role is mentioned. And I think that it doesn't limit the Public Safety coming to these, you know, as we saw, I think with Mom and Pops, the owner wasn't brought, to the Public Safety Committee in response to the police chief report, if I remember right, but was brought by other means. So again, I think that I agree with Mr. Weddleton that if there's public safety related purposes, it belongs here. And to me, that usually would mean an existing liquor license, maybe for renewal or for transfer to operators who are already demonstrated some history of public safety issues or violations or complaints or a large number of complaints. And I think that's different than land use, where you're seeing, should we approve a new one? And the CEDC's review of marijuana licenses has mostly been for new ones because it's an industry that's just ramping up. Anyway, I wanted to share those thoughts with you and those code provisions. And the document that Mandy shared, there's also subsequent sections 230, 125. It lists those things for the assembly to consider when they consider whether to protest renewal, issuance, or transfer of a liquor license. And the resolution form that we've been using for that tracks those sections. So we'll never recognize the language, I would hope. And section 230, 130, it's more about if there's conditions and the police knows violations of conditions that they would report that. So I just wanted to point those things out. I think it looks like now the documents showed on screen.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. I think that helps us to be a little bit clear about what role we could and should play. I have a question or a comment from Mr. Constant.
Thanks. Yeah, so I would offer that just because things have always been in the code relating to Public Safety Committee doesn't mean that's where they necessarily should be. And if it takes a code change I don't know if this is something I'll invest a lot of time in, but I would suggest we should think about it. Again, the state shifted their whole paradigm from looking at alcohol selling businesses as criminal enterprises that are tolerated to commercial entities that are businesses in our economy that we can and should support. And so I think that paradigm shift is one certainly worth considering at some point. We're like 8 years behind the state or 6 years behind the state, but we can't always be on the leading edge.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Constant. I have a question from Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Mr. Weddleton and Mr. Constant bring up good points, and obviously they're somewhat contradictory. So we do need to be thinking about that, though, just to really figure out how the best way forward is, and so that we're not redundant in things that we do. And that kind of leads me to my question, though. And one of the things that this committee is a committee of the whole. So that means every one of us is on this committee. And at the same time, every one of us can sit in that quasi-judicial role when we have some of these licenses before us at a regular assembly meeting. So my concern or my question is, to what extent can we actually even be looking at some of these licenses in this committee, knowing that we may actually see them again in a role where we're not supposed to be talking to the parties unless we disclose that. And anyway, for me, it kind of gets legally complicated. So my question is, and since we have at least 3 attorneys on here with us, really, what is the extent to which this committee can function with liquor licenses, knowing that we may very well have to play that quasi-judicial role later? Thank you. And I don't care who answers, anybody that wants to jump on it. So.
Well, I just happen to have Mr. Gates in the queue. Mr. Gates, do you want to address that question?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I asked the queue to respond to Mr. Constant when he was speaking about regulations, and I just wanted to point out that in our code and our code for liquor license review and our role as a local government being able to protest the state's issuance. And we also have Chapter 1050 that has some local regulation of the operations of liquor licensed premises. But I just want to say both those are very localized. And it's very different than we have our how we've structured and established our marijuana code provisions, where we also have our own municipal license. And in the marijuana code, we very closely track almost all of the state regulations in 3AC, Chapter 306, with the marijuana state regulations. Our code in Chapter 1080 tracks those very closely. So when there's a state regulation change, we really need to update our code. And I'm just mentioning this because our alcohol code sections are not structured that way. We don't duplicate state regulations so closely, and we only have certain code sections in 1050 where we're regulating alcohol licenses and their operations more restrictively than in state regulation. So often when there's a state regulation change, we already regulate more restrictive and we don't need to make an update. But we do watch for those. Ms. Honest is very good at keeping track of the state issues regulations, and we do need to pay attention, but we don't often have, I guess, the need to update once there's a state regulation change. Anyways, I guess since I had started talking, I maybe respond to the ex parte and the quasi-judicial role, and with liquor licenses and the Assembly's role in being able to protest the issuance, renewal, or transfer of one. It's a little unique because we don't actually make the decision to issue the license or non-renew or deny the license. And so we're not making that quasi-judicial decision that affects the applicant's rights or property rights for a license. We're just making a recommendation to the state board. And so in the code, in chapter, in section 230-120, subsection H at the bottom of that section mentions specifically that and quote, the prohibition against ex parte communication does not apply to the Assembly's decision whether to protest issuance of a new license, renewal, or transfer of an existing license, transfer of ownership, or issuance of a duplicate license until such time as a protest has been filed with the State of Alaska Alcoholic Beverage Control Board, unquote. And this is important to distinguish between other quasi-judicial functions. So it's in Mrs. Kennedy's remarks, she said it's kind of sticky, it is, but you are able to talk to the applicant directly because of this exception to the ex parte communication. It would be, I guess, advisable to share what you learn or what you do or what you talk about the substance about with the committee or the full assembly later. And actually, if you are concerned about ex parte communications and you just want to avoid it regardless of this exception, you communicate with the applicant or people, I guess, often community council or neighbors who are opposed to the application in noticed meetings on the record, like this committee meeting or the assembly meeting. But again, we have that exception here. So I know maybe that doesn't help make it clearer, but that is the state of the law we have in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. And I think this gives Ms. Kennedy and I a great deal of information to be able to think about how we want to shape the next 12 months. And I appreciate the conversation and the questions. Just in light of time, I would like to move on to our next part. I don't see any other comments or questions in the chat on this topic, so I'm going to move on. Just to prepare for this next part, we sent out to a number of folks the request to respond to 3 questions that would help us to understand what the priorities are for the different departments and what role that we can play as a committee moving forward. The 3 questions were, number 1, how can the Public Safety Committee support and add value to the work of your department? Number 2, what priorities would you like the Public Safety Committee to focus on over the next 12 months? And question number 3, are there immediate issues you believe the Public Safety Committee needs to focus on over the next 90 days? If so, what are those issues? And so in the agenda, we've got about 5 minutes for each per person to speak, but we can certainly be flexible. And then we want to make sure that there's opportunity for question and discussion. So first up, if we could have Chief Dahl share your response to those questions and any other information you think is helpful to for the committee to think about planning moving forward. Chief Dahl.
Hi, thanks. So I don't have any specific requests of the committee, things for the committee to work on. Typically, our role at the Public Safety Committee is to bring information and sort of advise on things that the police department is doing. But to the extent that we have any requests for things for the committee to work on, we just don't at this point. But I'm always happy to answer questions if anybody has any. Okay, great. I don't see any questions in the queue. Okay. All right, then we will move on. Oh, wait, let's see. Chris, I have Mr. Constant in the queue. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thanks. And I don't know if this is for the chief. Chief, you and I spoke about this briefly before, but I would like to see the committee pick up the conversation over the next 90 days and a year about murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. That I think we should pick that up as a plank of our committee and review, take a snapshot of where we are and figure out how we can do better. So that is my priority that I'd like to see the committee working on in relationship to our efforts.
Right. Chief, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think, we've talked about that in front of the committee previously, and we had some of our partners from Native Peoples Action come and speak, and then APD's had subsequent meetings with them, a couple of subsequent meetings. And so I think that we're, from APD's perspective, we're making good progress on that. We recently created 2 full-time cold case detective positions to do nothing but review our historical cases for missing and murdered people, all people in Anchorage. We're also working with Native Peoples Action on reviewing some of the training curriculum that we use in our police academy. So from our perspective, those things have been successful, and we're doing good work there. But again, we're always happy to talk more about what's going on there.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to add, appreciate Chris bringing that up, that Suzanne and Meg and I met with Chief Dahl with representatives from Native Peoples Action and Native Movement. What was that, maybe 6 months ago, Chief?
Yeah, I think so. Yep, that sounds right.
And Deputy Chief McCoy and MJ Thim was there, and they were terrific. The chief and his team, we spent hours talking about changes to data or other things that the department could do, collaboration with the state, et cetera. And I know that those partners really appreciate it. So I just wanted to thank the chief and let him know that he's already been engaging on some of that work.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. I see no other people in the queue for questions. So we're going to move on to our next. Do we have someone who, I can't see all the members, is Chief Hedrick in the group today, or is someone else from the Anchorage Fire Department here?
Good afternoon, Chair Perez-Barreda. Yeah, and this is Jody Hedrick. I am on. Yes.
Oh, great. We would love to hear your thoughts and responses to the questions that we posed.
Well, I appreciated definitely having the questions. That gives us an opportunity to prepare, but I wanted to really quick thank you to the support that we got from the Assembly for Prop 9. It was successful, and it is a sea change for the way we can deliver EMS area-wide. And as Chief Benningfeld kind of mentioned, area-wide EMS is delivered by 3 different agencies, and that prop giving us the opportunity to deliver EMS equipment or lease EMS equipment, deliver it to all 3 agencies, so we have a much more consistent ability to serve our community is very welcome. That is a really big step for us. I also kind of wanted to touch real quickly on, there have been quite a few questions on how we're dealing with the COVID response and our costs. Quite a bit of the costs related to the COVID response have been PPE and overtime, and of course those were non-budgeted for our 2020 budget. We are seeking grants to seek reimbursement for our PPE purchases and overtime and other labor costs associated with that. And we, Anchorage Fire Department is taking the lead on that, but those, we are also including Girdwood Fire Department and Chugiak Fire Department in the pool so that their costs will be reimbursed as well. So the first question that you asked was how the Public Safety Committee could support and add value to the department. And I think one of the things I would offer is an opportunity for you to understand how fire and EMS and other hazards are dealt with within the municipality. There's always quite a bit of confusion about which departments do what and at what level, and I would look for an opportunity where we could provide a little bit more comprehensive information and report to this committee. And we will have our biannual report hopefully at the June public safety meeting. We had anticipated we would have that done in March. We prepare our annual report. It's actually a biannual every 2 years, and the person who publishes and puts together the whole report is currently at the EOC in the logistics as the logistics deputy chair or deputy chief. So she has not been available to finish the report. So we hope to have that for you in June and maybe use that as an opportunity to kind of explain how we deliver fire and EMS services municipality wide, what our borders are, what our call volume looks like, and things like that. Because it's been a while since we updated the assembly on where we're at. Number 2 is the priorities for the public, what we would like your help in helping us with. And the first one is we as an organization need to work harder on reducing our call volume. One of those is the core team. When we're focused on our high utilizers and ensuring that they get out of the system and can get back to a more successful, productive lifestyle. That is helpful. So you'll be hearing more from us on the core team. But the other piece is our community risk reduction piece. And we have, we reallocated a position to a community risk reduction person. And that work is really getting out information to the community and every opportunity we have so that they are basically living safer lives, reducing car wrecks, reducing fire-related injuries and experiences, and from our car seat program and our bike helmet program and things along those lines that actually are reduce our call volume because they make the community safer. So there will be more to come on that, but definitely more support from and involvement and helping the fire department get that word out that should be a priority for our organization. We don't just respond to emergencies. Our mission statement is that we serve the community before, during, and after. And that before piece is something we need to do quite a bit of work on. And the other thing is one of our biggest obstacles is we are seeing a reduction in applicants for our firefighter positions. And so we're concerned about what our applicant pool looks like. But on top of that, we get an extremely low number of women and minorities who apply for positions with the fire department. And part of that piece is people just don't apply. I don't know if they don't consider us a viable option for career field, or they just don't know enough. And we would like to look for solutions to that and increase our minority representation on the department so the department more accurately reflects the community that we serve. And the last one, immediate issues. Just a reminder, and I know that you guys have all heard this from me before, AFD budget, we are projecting a shortfall for 2020. It was not addressed in the first quarter budget revisions. And in preparation for the 2021 budget, I think we have to have some really hard discussions on what is going to happen with AFD's budget so that either we reduce services because we don't have the funding to do that, or we find funding to cover our costs. And we're going to be pushing up against some long-term results in the fact that we haven't invested in some of the things for our fire department for a really long time. Just for example, the small vehicle fleet. Most of our vehicles are getting up there in years and starting to cost significantly in maintenance. And we have no funding. We have several proposed plans, but we need options for that. So I think that's our biggest concern with AFD and me as the chief is what is our 2021 budget going to look like? And we need to at some point right size the budget for the service that the community wants from the organization. And I'm here for any questions anyone might have.
Thank you, Chief. And I do have some questions for you. Let's start with Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Chief. A couple things you just said kind of caught my attention, especially about the applicant pool and the budget shortfall. But actually, I wanted to ask first about community resiliency. And thank you for your help in that and the help of your department. As you know very well, there is an active group here in District 6 that's very focused on building community resiliency, especially with wildfires. And that's something that I would like this committee to take up and support. And I was wondering how that fits in your priorities and what role you see that the community could take in working with AFD on supporting those efforts. Thanks.
So we've been, very impressed with the Rabbit Creek Community Council. They worked hard to become a designated Firewise community, which is a national designation and allows them to seek funding to solve their concerns within their geographic area. The department 100% supports that. Unfortunately, we don't have the resources as we did a decade ago when we were getting millions of dollars to deal with the spruce bark beetle problem and our Firewise program. That has dwindled to about $100,000 a year. We are continuing to support that every way that we can, and we have sought other grant funding, hopefully some of the mitigation money out of last year's fires. We submitted a grant to do more wildfire mitigation along those in public spaces. We have not heard whether we will receive that funding yet or not. So yes, I'm strongly supportive, especially when a community takes the lead on it and the community council areas are out actively getting the people within that geographical area to build defensible space, become firewise, and things along the lines of the life safety roads. That's going to be huge for the hillside, and supporting better access in and out so that we can get into a fire area quicker and people can evacuate. So I think we're on the right track. It just comes down to resources.
Thanks, Chief. And a quick follow-up, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to add, I'm not familiar with area-wide, like what's being done in Eagle River, for example, for strengthening resiliency there. And so I would be interested in getting an understanding of how we're approaching it muni-wide as well. I'm mostly familiar with what's been going on in District 6. Thanks.
Assemblymember LaFrance, this is the Firewise program is open area-wide. So we not only service the hillside, but we have people who apply for the Firewise program and get the assessments and the reimbursement that happens throughout the municipality. It is on a first come, first serve basis. We don't prioritize depending on what part of the community that they're in. Right now, we have over 200 requests for that basically came in at the end of last year, and that we will restart that program June 1st, so that we can get back out and doing assessments and following up on those people who we did assessments for last year. So that is a municipality wide. And when we submitted the funding for the public lands wildfire mitigation, which is basically going through and cleaning up brush and thinning trees and taking out dead spruce trees and stuff, those will be done on public lands. And we actually identified areas throughout the municipality from Eklutna all the way to Girdwood, high target areas that are suffering from significant spruce bark beetle infestations on public lands, because right now we don't have the funding to do that. Parks and Rec tries to get to the places that they can, but again, they don't have the funding. So hopefully this grant would allow us to make at least a start on that program. We've submitted 2 grants. The first one I think was for about $1 million that will get us started. We also submitted for another $6 million that would, but I think it covers 1,250 acres in the municipality and public lands. That isn't very much, but at least it would get us started, and those will be targeted at areas that we have concerns about.
Thank you so much.
Member Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to thank Chief Petrick for laying out all of these opportunities and being so thoughtful. It really helps us engage, and thank the co-chairs for putting this together and thinking about how we can reframe the Public Safety Committee. And in thinking about all of this, it occurs to me that, as Suzanne always says, the third leg of the stool of public safety is public health. And I don't see Ms. Pineda in the list of participants right now. So I just wanted the co-chairs to weigh in on how and if they plan to engage Ms. Pineda. And I want us to all, in hearing Ms. Chief Petrick speak about some of the prevention work, and so much of that has to do with public health. And I want our community to start, and us to start thinking about how we fund programs that save us money in the long term, because we don't need as much response. So if the co-chairs or either chief wants to weigh in on that, and if you could specifically, co-chairs, speak to whether Ms. Pineda could get involved in this conversation with the Public Safety Committee as well.
Well, I can speak to that a little bit. So unlike in past years, I will say that the health department, the fire department, and the police department probably work together better than we ever have. We do a lot of cooperative work. Chief Dahl, and Ms. Pineda and myself communicate at least usually on a weekly basis. We often, meet for lunch. We run a lot of our ideas through each other. The fire department does work hand in hand with the health department on a lot of our initiatives. we also work with Safe Kids and some of the other community partners. So we are trying to have a more comprehensive approach when it comes to this. I think one of the things we have struggled with is the health department. They rely significantly on federal and state grants and funding for programs that they have access to that we don't, but that doesn't include a lot of prevention type programs for injury prevention. So without, when it comes to resourcing, I don't think we in public safety or public health have really put prioritization on injury prevention, community risk reduction programs that would, in the long run, save us all not only money, but it's more healthy for the community if we have a safer community to live in. And I can't touch on whether she should be at this committee meeting, but we do try to work cooperatively together. It's all comes down to resourcing and who has staff available and what programs that we can really tackle.
Thank you, Chief. And I can just say that I think it's the interest. It's my interest, and I'm feeling like it's true of Ms. Kennedy as well, of really just trying to make sure that we have a clear scope for this committee, and figuring out what that scope is and what our priorities are over the next year. And certainly, there's a strong connection between the discussion we're having now and public health. So certainly, I'm very open to reaching out to Miss Padilla and also and having her involved. I just want to make sure that we're not overtaxing the departments and the folks that we are engaging with. Ms. Kennedy, did you have a response to that as well?
Yeah, I think just in terms of trying to get a handle on what this committee is going to be, how it's going to be useful to everybody. I absolutely appreciate Chief Hetrick's specifics on this. But again, it'll help us, I think, with the next meeting to try to really put some specific things on the agenda. So anyway, I think just gathering all this information right now is important. And any kind of suggestion about what people think we ought to be looking at, I think is going to be important. So we're definitely adding to our list of possibilities, and I'm okay with that. But anyway, this has been good conversation. So thanks.
Great. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. You alluded to or intimated issues relating to the budget. So I think that that's an area that we are probably going to want to explore sooner than later when the time is right for you. So let's begin that conversation as soon as we can, so we can overcome the challenges and meet the needs of the community. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. I see no other people in the queue. Thank you, Chief, for your presentation. We really appreciate your time and your thoughtful response to our questions.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yep. So we're going to move on to our next presentation, and I believe Sarah Stanley, are you on, and are you prepared to share your thoughts as it relates to the questions that we shared?
Yes, I'm present. I wanted to share a little where the prosecution office is in terms of our goals for next year. We are partners with several entities in our office, with APD most importantly, but then the court system, the DA's office to some extent, and then in a lesser way with JBER. Our big task for the next year is to really tackle some of our data and information sharing issues, and ultimately to go paperless. If any assembly person wants to get a tour of our office, you would see walls and walls and walls covered with thousands of paper files. So we would really like to tackle, how we handle information. So, and this goes several ways. We need to, it would be great if we could work on better sharing of information with APD. They're fabulous. But the discovery that we have to get from them, the audio and video, is in some ways, like video, for example, has to come over to our office on physical CDs to transfer that data. So we'd like to work on that. We'd also like to work internally on having no files and being paperless. But then we also want to work on working with the court system to work on the e-filing project, so that we are sending our charging documents and populating their database with the court system. And so this is all one massive IT project, basically. And that's what we would really like to tackle in the next year. And I've talked to Kate Vogel about this. Of course, funding is always an issue. There are some grants to apply for. APD alerted us to one of them, which is fabulous. We may also be able to apply for some other grants to work on getting the programming in place to make this all happen. But I think if we can really streamline some of that data sharing, it will help us. It'll make us more efficient. It'll save probably APD. It'll probably help them a little. It will help the court system. And it will also benefit both victims and defendants who have a right to a speedy trial that shouldn't be slowed down by, by things being analog. So that's our big vision for the next year of what we'd like to do internally. If anyone has any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments from the committee? I don't see any. So well, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us and for sharing your thoughts. Can I ask, I do have a question. How is there a role, do you see a role for this committee to help you with that work that you mentioned? How can we help to support you?
Probably funding and just your support as we apply for grants. Obviously, we'll try to get as many grants as possible to fund it and try to keep costs as low as possible. But that's probably the biggest role right now. But going forward, honestly, I haven't done this before. I'm not sure what obstacles we'll face. So we'd love to stay in touch with you about it and keep you apprised of our progress. And there may be things that you can do to help that I'm not foreseeing. So.
Right. And I have a question from Miss Kennedy. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I got distracted by another meeting, but that some other organization. But anyway, one of the questions that I think this committee had previously was about the ability to prosecute more cases that the state would otherwise handle. Do we have any kind of a sense of whether or not we want to pursue that, go down that avenue? Anyway, just some thoughts on that.
Well, I guess my feeling right now is that we are really good at prosecuting the misdemeanors that we handle. And the state is pretty good at, prosecuting the felonies that they prosecute. There's been, the last couple of years have seen a little more just communication between our office and theirs, especially on the domestic violence front. I think we have some other things to tackle that are more pressing before we look into whether to take on, prosecuting a whole new kind of case and interfacing with a whole nother court. Superior Court is a whole nother court with different systems, different calendaring, which would involve radically reorganizing our office to take that on right now.
Okay, thank you. So I guess right now the answer is no. But okay,
yeah, I think right now I'm not seeing a huge category of cases that is sort of not being handled by either the state or by us. I think we really have the APD cases that come to us covered pretty well. And so I think it'd be better to shore up some other systemic things and work on improving what we do right now before, taking on something else.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, I don't see any other questions in the queue. Thank you again for your time and for being here and for sharing your thoughts. We do very much appreciate it. We're going to move on, and I do want to make sure that there's time for audience participation. I'm not sure if there are members of the public who want to speak, but I want to make sure that we get to that at the end. So let's just open up for discussion right now. And I think that the next phase was really to just reflect on the presentations that we've had, and if members of the committee have priorities that they want to share that we need to be thinking about as we do develop our plans. So any reflections or comments from the presentations that we've had, and any priorities that you feel like that we want to make sure that we put into our planning. And I think there's a comment from Miss Kennedy. Is that right?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. My comment really is in regard to what we could be doing or what we'll be doing in the near future to look at how the new liquor tax will be spent. So I know we've been asked by the Assembly Chair to put somewhere in our conversations, a discussion with where we think that funding should go. So I'll just bring that up, with all of those who've been involved today, between the fire departments, the police department, certainly the Department of Law. However we move forward with targeting those funds specifically, they will all be an important part of that conversation. So just to keep that in mind, that we'll be having those bigger conversations of really specifics. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. And I don't see any other comments in the queue. I do want to create a little bit of space for our committee legislative and budget priorities. That we don't have a presentation for either of these, but I just want to open space. Are there any comments from members of the committee related to legislative priorities? So I'll start there. Any comments or questions that members have around legislative priorities for this committee? Okay. Seeing none, waiting, but looking. Okay. I'm going to move on to budget items for 2021. This is a conversation we're certainly going to be having a lot over the next few months, but just want to make sure that there's space for anybody to make a comment or add anything on budget items for 2021 related to this committee. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to reiterate what a couple of other members had said too about the budget shortfall. And that's something that I definitely want to address before we get into a situation of engines having to come offline again, because that's very important to the community. And so whatever we can do to address that now and prevent it from happening next year, I think we should definitely make a priority. Thanks.
Thank you. That's an important one, and we will definitely note that. Any other comments before we move on to audience participation? Okay. Any other comments at all related to the meeting as a whole? I see none. All right. Mandy, do we have anyone from the public who is interested in speaking? Ms. Honest, are you there?
I was muted. I apologize. There are a few
sure.
members of the public on. If you would like to speak, you can hit *6 on your phone to unmute yourself.
Would anyone from the public like to speak? If so, you can share your name with us. Miss Honest, there's no way that you can't see whether they're.
I don't see any notes from any of the call-in numbers, so it would just be they would unmute themselves if they wanted to speak.
Okay, great. Well, I'll just give one more chance. If there's anyone from the public who would like to speak, if you could *6 and then share your name, please.
This is Al Millspaw, University Area Community Council. Can you hear me?
I can. Thank you for being here. If you'd like to speak, you have three minutes.
Yeah, I have one comment. I think this is great. At the meeting where we were actually there in person, a lot of times it's hard to hear the speakers, and today was fantastic. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Is there anyone else from the public who would like to speak today? Okay, seeing none. We don't need a motion to adjourn a committee meeting. Is that correct, Ms. Sonis?
You can take a motion if you want.
Okay.
It's a little early, so.
Yeah. Well, it looks like that we have completed our business for the day. Ms. Kennedy, any closing comments before we adjourn the meeting?
Well, I was kind of interested in getting a bit of an update on the fire at 3rd and Ingra.
Oh, that's right.
Just to kind of give us the highlights and maybe what we need to know from APD and AFD perspective.
Great. Chief Hedrick, would you like to give us an update on the fire at 3rd and Ingra?
Yeah, so last night we responded about 8 o'clock to a report of a fire near a homeless camp at 3rd and Ingra. We responded. We'd also heard reports of injuries. When we got on scene, it was a small fire, not even a quarter of an acre, that had just started to spread into the woods. We were able to jump on it real quick and extinguish, and we ended up, there weren't any real injuries related to the fire, so we ended up not transporting or treating anyone. And it took us about 20 minutes to get everything under control and extinguish water down the entire area. And then I believe APD might have had some involvement.
Great. Chief Dahl, are you still on? Would you like to share any updates as it relates to 3rd and Ingra?
Sure, I'm still here. Normally our role in an incident like that is to support the fire department, ensure scene safety, traffic control, stuff like that. And then ultimately, our folks will take enforcement action if there was some sort of violation that was associated with the event. I'm not aware of any enforcement action from last night, but that's generally what we do.
Thank you. Thank you, Chiefs, for the update. I see no other questions or comments on the agenda. And so with that, we were efficient in our time. Appreciate move to adjourn. I heard a move to adjourn from Ms. Kennedy. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.